Hello, everyone. My name is Godel St. Hilaire, and this is the critical fraction for my media studies project. To give a brief introduction into my media studies project, it is to create a magazine. The genre that I chose was aviation, and to that end, I went and done some research. I even bought an aviation magazine to kind of learn the conventions and to learn exactly how they operate. But for my design, I ultimately took some inspiration, but not totally inspiration, as I wanted to create an original design that's tailored specifically to my vision of the magazine. Now on to question one. How does your product use or challenge conventions? Throughout my research and during the earlier parts of just compiling my magazine, I drew heavy inspiration from several magazines, especially in regards to cover. As you can see, there's a couple of examples here on Flight Journal, Airline Pilot, and Flying. Uh, those designs, especially for the main image, uh, were kind of reflected on the earlier drafts I sent for my cover. As you can see, my main image is a little different from the earlier examples. Like I said earlier, I was going to have an aircraft originally as the main image, but since it didn't fit in with the leading article, I ultimately just came up with the idea to just have it as the main image. The gentleman right there is Colonel White. Uh, as for my leading article, I dealt with structural hierarchy in that I wanted it to be at like the topmost right or topmost left when I was drafting my original designs. It was also based upon the Aviation News magazine having their special, um, kind of like special edition story at the very top to, kind of entice viewers. And as for my master as well, I wanted to create something unique, something original, um, especially when the names in most aviation magazines are just kind of bland, like Aviation News or Flying Magazine. Those are names that don't really stick out. Maybe the font, but they don't really stick out. So I ultimately created V1 Rotate. One one reason because it's a pilot term, and that would probably show familiarity with the subject matter, and two, because it's really a unique name in a field of, more tame ones. Here you can see the my original inspiration for my table of contents. This was taken from the Aviation News magazine, and I took inspiration, especially with the big font text, but I ultimately changed the layout and design and color to better match my vision. Here is my table of contents. And here you can see where I began to take on an unconventional look, though it is highly similar in just kind of design to the previous example found on the Flying News magazine. You can see that the color, the content has become flipped almost. Well, not the content per se, but the colors definitely being flipped. And now it more resembles actually taxiway markings. Um, but the general design is just around there. But now I offered a more simplistic design instead of just overloading with text to just give them all that information all at once, which is not my intention at all, unlike other aviation magazines. I just want them to just get a brief synopsis of what the stories are about to just quickly gain either an interest and just quickly flip to that story, or to just, browse about, just like a magazine should function. Here you can find a better comparison between my table of contents and the Aviation News Magazine table of contents. So, as you can see, I try to follow conventions as closely as possible in that the general layout is quite similar. You can see how flight log and regulars kind of match up in kind of the same um, area in the page. Stories and features, well, I heavily based stories on features with the design, but as you can see, I branch off from conventions and ultimately went from a little unconventional design in that I simplified not only the text to make it quite easier on the eyes, not just how overload people's visions with text, um, but just made it really made a more simplistic design, so you just get your information as quickly as possible without just going through so much to figure it out. That's how I changed my images. One of the best examples of change or unconventionalness within my product can be found in my double page spread. So here you see my original inspiration from, I believe, the aviation magazine known as Flying News Magazine. And here is my example of my double page spread. Things have obviously changed. Number one, there's no kind of background image just across the two pages. Now it's just a uniform color. You can see I added a variety of secondary images, which is fine, but you can also see a change in text as well, definitely in font as well, color. The reason for all these changes is not simply just because I wanted it to look different, but also because I wanted it to be easy on the eyes for my audience and to be as simplistic as possible to just to get the point across. So my design follows unconventional design aspects precisely because I want it tailored to my audience. I want them to just go in simple. I want them to just understand the material as simple as possible, even though many aspects were unconventional for other aviation magazines. And now we're on to the second part of question one. How does my product represent social groups and issues? So, in my genre, it is not really all too common to see people represented other than, let's say, pilots or buyers or things of that nature. Instead, you would normally just come across some lighthearted stories or news. You don't really hear of major political shifts or political news unless you're leaning more, if you're leaning into more of a political magazine, which doesn't encompass what an aviation magazine is entirely. So, for my magazine, ultimately, it did not go with a kind of political issue that's kind of like ripping across the world. It did not go with such like a heavy-handed story like that, but instead dealt with an industry issue, in which case I explained more in my double page spread of massive layoffs in the industry, and then massive like a low amount of numbers of pilots coming in. So I went to great detail in trying to get that issue highlighted through my story, my double page spread story, but it does not represent not only that, people as well. For my aviation magazine, I had an age range in mind in that it would be tailored to more youthful people, you know, ages less than 24. And as you can see here on this graph, you can see that uh, quite a majority of aviation magazine goers, especially for one of the bigger magazines, this should be Flying Magazine. you can see that the bigger age ranges are on the older generation. I wanted to change that. And so I tailored my story and I tailored my design of my magazine, my product, to ultimately reflect on newcomers, new people coming in and wanting to try and experience, aviation. And so to that end, I incorporated a variety of design elements, but I did not want to overload them with information, nor did I want to tell a very heavy topic. Now we're on question two. How does my project engage with audiences? So, I've talked a little bit about it in my previous question, but my target audience for this magazine is of youth, of under the age of 24, just getting into the field of aviation and not having that much information. So, I designed my magazine to be as simplistic as possible to spur their heads into just thinking about these topics and learning. Now, of course, it's not an educational magazine, it's an aviation magazine, so I just want them to understand the terms and start to get a grasp of what the industry is like. So, I built my magazine cover, double page spread, table of contents, and over to basically include as simplistic as possible features. That means sometimes getting rid of what would be conventional in other aviation magazines. Now, as my magazine is not tailored towards what would be the normal target audience for aviation magazines, which would be more wide, affluent, and even older generation people, my magazine is, of course, tailored to younger people. And to pull these individuals in, I'd incorporate several features and several changes which would make my product unconventional in some designs. One of my most noticeable design changes is with my double page spread. Now, within aviation magazines, double page spreads would usually incorporate one main image across the two pages, which would provide background on the text. But for mine, I included a solid color and even tweaked the color a little bit during my design process. Originally, I was thinking of fitting in a different image of Colonel White on the background. I was going to have his image on one side while I have the text either on both sides or on one side. But I figured it would take away the image would take away from the text and would not blend too well, as the viewer would be too focused either looking at the text or just trying to look at the Colonel. And so I decided on changing that into just one solid color and adding in a bunch of secondary images to complement my text. Again, that's just an example you can find in just my double page spread, but you can also find the same for my cover, and you can also find the same for my table of contents, especially in my table of contents, as I really tried to simplify the design right there. Now on to the second part of the question. How would it be distributed as real media text? So my magazine, I'm looking for a price around $6. That falls really short within most magazines found in the genre. I've seen price ranges from $9 to $15 for the more expensive ones or name brand ones. But I decided on $6 because I really want my magazine to be as accessible as everywhere. And to that end, I am thinking of distributing it both digitally and physically through retail stores like Walmart or Target. You can find magazines up at front, or digitally through an online website connected to my magazine. You can also find it sometimes on social media. I'll have an account on major social media outlets like X or Instagram. So with that, my magazine should be as accessible as possible to any viewer. Now, as for why I believe that this is how it could work for my magazine, is because I've seen it happen I've seen it happen with major aviation magazines. One that comes to mind is Flying Magazine. They have an Instagram page which I went through my research early on in the school year, and where I found that they actually enjoy a pretty heavy Instagram following, and they also enjoy, I believe, a website. Yes, definitely a website to just kind of bolster viewers in, where they can both purchase like a monthly newsletter and basically get the same content as maybe getting it from a store. And for Flying Magazine, I also did purchase one of their magazines for, I believe, the October edition at my local Barnes and Nobles. So I think for my magazine, it should be um, fine to just be able to easily be able to access it across those platforms. Question three: how did my production skills develop through this project? So honestly, it was pretty rocky at first. I barely had any experience with Photoshop growing up. I only used Photoshop or even Adobe for a few times in my life, and it was really for just really mediocre projects that I aimed at. And so going along with this, it was kind of like really new to me because I never really interacted with it much. So it started off like very slow. Editing skills as well, just like trying to piece things together, even if it's a magazine, and even though I was taking in multiple examples, it was still pretty, it was still pretty, um, difficult, especially using Photopea. Photopea is, I wasn't used to such an archaic kind of UI and design before. Like I've seen some images of them, even in like the original Photoshop, but like using Photo P just kind of blew my mind because I felt like I was kind of set back in time almost. Sometimes it would crash and I would lose my progress. That'd be frustrating. Sometimes I just have to save like multiple copies of my work just to make sure it's there so I can continue on the next time the website loads. Doing that as well. Another thing was trying to like work within the time constraints set by my educator, which I tried to the best of my abilities to, but of course, when things slow down and things happen to be fast, it kind of sometimes piles up. So it was really, I would say, kind of stressful to deal with it because it's normally like a week kind of time frame. So you know, but I was able to go through that, and I was able to complete my product with help of my teacher. Actually, he really helped a lot. Learning skills on photo P, like taking out the background, adding in a bunch of colors, fillers, stuff like those. Utilizing camera shots, especially when recording and shooting uh, images for my magazine. It was really impactful in my final design. Speaking more about photography and taking camera shots, I am not the best at photography. Um, just similar to Photoshop, I don't really use that. Even though I have taken maybe 1,000 photos in my life, it's mostly just sporadic moments where I just kind of whip out my phone and take a cool little picture that I just found interesting. And of course, that the results would vary. Some look okayish. Some of them look like they were instead modern art paintings. But um, in the beginning, as Mr. as my educator um, taught us more about camera shots and angles, I saw myself actually applying these in my photo taking abilities. And so you can see a few examples on the side here of some camera shots I've taken around the year of 2023 to around 2024. In this time frame, I went from just whipping out my phone in some random moment to just kind of photograph a specific thing or one small thing to kind of getting a wide shot of everything. I guess you would say it's kind of my style because I still feel new, especially to my phone camera. But I take a lot of appreciation for kind of just setting up the shot or just finding a different angle to take that shot in. Some examples you can see like an um, extreme long shot in some of these, especially for the water-based one on the bottom, and you can see a kind of nearly a worm's eye level shot, worm's eye angle actually, at the top right image right there as I was walking through a busy city. Question 4. How did I integrate technologies, software, hardware, and online in this project? So, utilizing my phone camera, my Google Pixel camera, and utilizing the technology around me, including my laptop, I tried my best to do things as digitally as possible, especially when trying to edit images. But as as far as aviation magazines kind of go, it starts to come at a standstill. I don't have the Even though Google Pixel is a phenomenal camera, there are some limitations. As you can see with some images in my magazine, I only have some images of planes there, and only some because I did not have access to an airport, nor do I have access to kind of a stationary plane unless I'm really, really well close to one, maybe at an expo or somehow they allow me access to the airport, but most of the time that's not the case. And trying to also get a decent photo of a moving object, especially with a phone, is very, very difficult. So it was it was tiresome at times to try and get the best shot. I ended up like kind of like spamming uh, my phone button to just take as many shots as possible, even though I feel that most of them are probably gonna end up blurry in the end. Other times, it did even end up being the phone that ended up stressing me out, um, especially because there's another thing, Photo P, but also my laptop, even though it's also brand new, it ended up with some problems as well, especially with the browser. I didn't understand why Google Chrome would sometimes glitch out as it does, but sometimes that would happen. I think it happened once or twice during the school year, and I ended up uh, having to just redo my project on Photopea thanks to that. Despite having all this tech and technology just in my hands, it really just trying to get uh, aviation images was really limited. Just trying to get that creative thinking in me was spurred, but it could not happen thanks to just unforeseen consequences sometimes, and also the restraints of technology that I had. Phenomenal camera. I still say this now that the Google Pixel is a phenomenal camera, but when if you're a photographer, if you're not, if you're just an amateur like myself, it starts to become just a bit of a hassle. And that concludes my critical reflection over my media studies project. Overall, I really did like this product, and I did like this project because it really did test me to my limits. Getting to know different camera shots and different angles, getting to understand that and get into that kind of mind frame was definitely like a memorable experience, especially considering the fact that I wasn't actually thinking about being a photographer. But now I can just like recognize things now, and thanks to class, I can really appreciate things more, especially in regards to just placement.